Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my 12 Rules for Life series. This is Rule 11. Do not bother children when they're skateboarding. If you haven't seen this series before, pretty much what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize each of Jordan Peterson's rules from his book, 12 Rules for Life, and then I'm going to give my opinions on it. The title of this rule, Don't Bother Kids When They're Skateboarding, pretty much just means, let your kids grow up. Let them make mistakes. Don't be an Oedipal mother who's always interfering with them and stopping them from getting hurt at all times because they need to get hurt to grow sometimes. But to be honest, I don't think that's, the main course of this rule. I think what the main course really is Peterson's opinions on the patriarchy, which is probably one of the things he's most known for. This is definitely a controversial chapter, but I thought it was very interesting to read. And I certainly don't think Peterson is saying, the patriarchy doesn't exist or it was never real. I think what he's saying here is to think of the patriarchy as like a fundamentally like evil, tyrannical, like structure of power in Western society it's just not the best idea. Peterson's very well aware that Western society is not perfect, but I think the difference he's making here is sure, you could say we live in a patriarchy. Technically, by definition, yeah, we absolutely do. But what he's saying is we don't live in a fundamentally tyrannical patriarchy. And I mean, if you think about it, let's say we did live in a fundamentally tyrannical society. How could we have ever produced the living conditions of today in America, where I am? I mean, of course, America isn't perfect. America has, plenty of problems, but I would much rather live in America than some other countries, and I think most people would agree with that. I don't think it's even up for debate, it shouldn't be up for debate, that women are disproportionately affected in some regards, but I mean, the same goes the other way. In some ways, men are disproportionately affected in certain areas, and Peterson highlights those. Yes, the richest of the rich are male, and most people in the government are male, but I mean, for every one of those people, how many lower middle class, depressed, suicidal males are there? I mean, the ratio is very lopsided. I grew up in a pretty liberal household with very strong women. By the way, family, if you are watching this, I love you, family. But anyway, so because I grew up in a house with, very strong women, I came to kind of soak in this sort of information that, well, here's what I did know. I knew patriarchy existed. Patriarchy was not a good thing, and men were the patriarchy. So by transitive property, I pretty much, I calculated that, men equals bad. And I mean, that sounds kind of ridiculous, but I began to associate myself with those bad men. Like I was in that group just because that's what my biological sex is. And I was actually talking about this with a friend recently, and he said, like, okay, yeah, that's a fair point, but also it's like nobody's actually telling men to feel bad because they are men. And I would agree with that. I mean, absolutely no one in my family ever said that to me, ever. But I still felt like that, even if it was completely irrational. I mean, my friend gave this example. He said, like, if every time someone with blue eyes, because he had blue eyes, got bullied, like, should I feel bad? No, that'd be absolutely ridiculous. But I can't help that say that. I mean, I was very confused. I didn't really understand it, but I did somewhat feel like simply for being a male, I was in that group of like bad men that were the oppressors. And I mean, I've completely gotten over that now, but it made me wonder like how many other men feel like that even like today. Now, connecting this to the wage gap, I think is an interesting little chit chat. I mean, I used to think that, like, patriarchy equals men, patriarchy equals bad, so men are just, like abusing their power to get more money. But I think as I've gotten older, my opinion has gotten much more nuanced. I think you're an absolute idiot if you say, like, oh, there's no such thing as sexism or discrimination. That just makes no sense. I think the percentage you attribute to the wage gap due to sexism and discrimination is something that's definitely up for debate. I think it's much more complex than to simply say, males are fundamentally like evil oppressors who just like shove everyone else down so they can get more money. I think it's a much more nuanced conversation of, how does maternity leave, whether you agree with that or not, it's a factor. Things like work preferences, work effort. And again, let me reiterate that I can't rightfully sit here. It would be absolutely stupid to say sexism and discrimination does not exist in the workplace. That's absolutely ridiculous. And I'm going to make a point here, and it sounds like common, like right-wing rhetoric, but I do think it's a fair point. I mean, companies do not want to pay their employees more than they have to, right? So if companies could pay women to do the exact same work as men for less money, I mean, why would men ever be hired at all? It's a fair point to say, well, a company would do that because it's a sexist company, but then you could also say, well, companies just like money, and they're going to do what they can to reduce their implicit costs. And let me say it one final time. Sexism and discrimination absolutely exist. I think it's the percentage you can attribute to the wage gap that is up for debate. Moving on from that, let us talk about masculinity. So for a long time, I used to just think, masculinity is this like cornball, clickbait, YouTube shit that fucking just like random self-improvement YouTubers use to get views, like how to be more masculine and attract more girls, shit like that. But as I've gotten older, I've kind of realized, for me, masculinity just is literally as simple as pursuing purpose. Like that's it, 2 words. And Peterson says that, this masculine trait of pursuing purpose is something for everyone. He just calls it masculine, but I mean, it's for males and females, really. Whether you're male or female, if you lack purpose, then your life really has no meaning. And this is kind of a scary jump in logic here, but I mean, if your life has no meaning, then it's like, why are you on the earth? I mean, I wonder if that is a reason why suicide in general has getting higher. And that's why Peterson says, in this way of masculinity, it is bad that people are becoming less masculine. I've never even cared about, like dressing masculinely. Like, I don't really care if you wear dresses or wear earrings. I have earrings. Or paint your nails or anything like that. Like, that's never really even been a thought of mine. Anyway, before I went off on that tangent, I think Peterson is saying the problem with just today's society in general, male and female, is this masculine trait of purpose is being lost. It's never that, men are having more traditionally female personalities. If you look up videos of Jordan Peterson, he literally cries in like half of them. I think he said he likes baking and stuff like that. Like, Peterson doesn't actually want you to be like the like Sigma billionaire rich male. He's telling no one to be like that. What he is telling people to do is to get their shit together, pursue something that matters to them, and be successful, whatever that means to them. And for some people, that means getting super rich. And I think that's the big issue Peterson has with this fundamental tyranny of, the patriarchy issue, is that it's not that just like people in general wanting to climb the ladder and become more successful is bad, particularly men. Like, this idea is not bad. It's something that should be encouraged. You should want to like get better, right? It may sound like I just back Peterson on everything he says because he's, a credible psychologist, but I think I really do agree with this take of, everyone should pursue their purpose. Like, I think that shouldn't even be like up for debate. Like, that should just be almost fact. And Peterson, like I said before, he's not telling people to go be like Sigma males or some bullshit like that. He's saying find your purpose and pursue that, and live the best life you can. And I don't agree with all of his takes. I mean, I think his take on climate change and vaccines is like, I think it's honestly kind of hilarious that a scientist of any caliber can even believe that. But I mean, I still find a lot of value in his perspective. To be honest, I do think the idea of hierarchy is natural. I agree with him in the whole lobster shebang, whatever you want to call it. And it's like this idea of hierarchy has existed far longer than humans have existed. And I think it just makes sense to say, well, we probably follow that pattern. And it's not even like this like socio-economical hierarchy. I mean, there's hierarchy everywhere. Like there's a billion people who are better than me at YouTube. I'm sure I'm better than other people at YouTube. Like everyone has like a number for a billion different things. To be honest, I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm perfectly okay with knowing that some people are better than me at some things and I'm better than some people at other things. Like I think that's a perfectly reasonable take. And to say that, me being better than someone at some random thing, like I'm pretty good at Smash Bros. Let's say I'm better at Smash Bros than someone. Am I being like fundamentally evil because I'm better at Smash Bros than them because I'm higher on the leaderboard? Like what? No. And to sort of wrap this all up, because I've been rambling for a while, but it's just like Peterson is not saying to women like, oh, look at us poor men, our lives are so bad. I think what he really wants to get across to everyone though is that just being a strong man or just being a strong person is not like evil. You are not oppressing anyone by wanting to become better. Okay, now we go on to the idea of the left-wing social science courses. So Norman Doidge, the author of The Foreword, talks a lot about social relativism and ideology, and he really does not like either of them. I think I definitely agree with him on that. I think the whole idea of social relativism is just like kind of stupid. It's like, would you say Nazi Germany was bad? I sure hope you would. Like, would you say slavery is bad? Yes, absolutely. Of course it was. Like, you can't just say, like, oh, it was a different time. Like, that's so fucked up. And Deutsch pretty much just says ideology is just a way of simplifying the world in a way that does not accurately represent the complexity of the world. And you could say, like, oh, well, isn't this whole book just an ideology? And you'd be right, it is an ideology. But isn't literally everything an ideology? I mean, even the ideology of there should be no ideology, like that's still an ideology. It's like you can't get around it. So I do think that argument is a bit flawed because you could say that about literally everything. Anyway, his issue with the left-wing courses is they are kind of, in his eyes at least, they're promoting ideology. They're promoting the simplification of the world. I'm pretty sure like this whole idea of like patriarchy equals tyrannical, evil men's society, which is partially true, absolutely. I think you're an absolute fool if you say women have not been oppressed throughout history. Like, that's just an absolutely ridiculous take. But to be told that, that's it, that's all there is to it, that's the final answer. I mean, it's no wonder that men are leaving the social sciences. I mean, like, I'd be pretty pissed if I went to class and someone was telling me, like, oh, everything's your fault. Like, I wouldn't want to do that. Another interesting take in this book is the importance of religion and how, like, millennials and Gen Z have grown up much less with religion. And I think Peterson would argue that's led to these two generations being sort of like lost in comparison because, they don't have the knowledge of the ancient humans, the things that people have been saying for so long on how to live a good life. And I think this kind of ties back to Peterson's opinion that, like, even if you're an atheist, you still are technically following a religious belief by pursuing higher order. But it's like, that's a tough one. To be honest, I'm absolutely not qualified to talk about this, like the left-wing courses. And the same kind of goes for the USSR. but I mean, I will say from the little bit of history I do know, I mean, like communism in theory sounds great and all, but I don't think it would ever work in a real society. I think, I mean, human nature is just going to take over like we've seen it done, and it's just going to result in very bad things. And I think Peterson does a pretty good job of staying pretty nuanced here when he talks about like the spectrum of economy and how, you know, some countries may be more towards capitalism, some may be closer towards socialism. But what you can say for sure is like the very far end of socialism, communism, yeah, that's not a great choice. Finally, to touch on some of the things that Peterson says about inherent differences in biological sex, he cites the Scandinavian study a lot, which pretty much found that, oh, you know, look at these Scandinavian countries where, you know, like sex equality is pretty good, and look at what happens to their personalities. Well, they actually get more different based on sex on average. And I think that was a really interesting idea. It's something I would say I agree with, the fact that there are some differences on average between biological sexes. But I mean, of course, there's everything in between too. So, yeah. So I'm going to leave you to ponder that because I've been talking for way too long. Have a good day, you guys.